Welcome to Tales on the Towpath, the podcast where every mile tells a story.
We're two runners who spend a lot of time out here on the C&O Canal towpath, talking about training, racing, and everything that happens between the miles.
From early morning runs to the stories that keep us moving.
This is where endurance meets inspiration, one step, one tail at a time.
So lace up and join us on the path, because every trail has a story, and this one's ours.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Adam Lowe.
And I'm Chris Earl.
Hey, Chris, today we are joined by Andy Mason, a runner, a sports reporter and writer, and author of a brand new book called Hagerstown versus the World, a true running story. I read the book. It took me 2 days to read it. I read online that it was taking everybody else 1 day to read it, but it took me 2 days because I got about halfway through and then I had to throw my shoes on and go for a run on the towpath and then come back and finish the second half of the book the next day. That's how good I thought it was. So, Andy, we are excited to have you on today to talk to you about your running, a little bit about the book, and near the end, I want to get into how I think you actually have helped shape my running career with an article that you did about me in the Herald Mail. So thank you for being on today, Andy. We really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to talk about this.
Yeah, I cannot wait for this conversation. I'm pumped up. I know the stories, like I said in the book, about Hagerstown runners in the 80s that really got me fired up, talking about some of the legends who I've been fortunate enough to meet throughout the year or the years. And it's just been a lot of fun to kind of go back down memory lane and read those. Before we get into the book a little bit, why don't you tell us a little bit about your sports background growing up and then kind of how you found running?
Well, when I was a kid, I've always been a huge sports fan, pretty much from day one of being interested in anything. My first love was baseball. As a kid growing up in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, there weren't a ton of options. Like if you're in kindergarten or first grade and you want to play an organized sport, it has to be baseball. And pretty much every kid in my neighborhood, greater neighborhood, played. And I played, loved it, absolutely loved it. Started collecting baseball cards, studying box scores, memorizing names. I was all in with Major League Baseball. I loved the NFL too. College basketball. I was really good at baseball as a kid, pretty good in like elementary school. And then as I got older, I don't know, other kids started catching up to me. I stopped being like an all-star at some point, probably by middle school age. So I was not like a great athlete then. I was into sports, but by middle school, I was just an average athlete. And in 8th grade at Faust Junior High School, where I went, they had, there were sports teams you could join. And probably there was like football in the fall. That wasn't for me. I was cut from the basketball team. There were like 60 kids who tried out and they took 15 and didn't make it. But that spring you could join the junior high track team. And I joined. A bunch of my friends were joining, and I joined the track team not because I had any great interest in running or being a runner or even thought I could be a good runner. I just did it because that's what my friends were doing. And at the same time, for the previous few years, my dad had started running. And for him, he did races and stuff, but for him, it was more about physical fitness, staying fit, trying to lose some weight. So I had sort of a running background growing up with a dad who went to some races, and I went to some races. So anyway, I joined the track team in 8th grade. I'm not very good, but I got better. Had a decent high school career, not great. I was, maybe a slightly above average high school runner, and went to college, William and Mary in Virginia, continued to run every day, not on the team or anything, raced occasionally, but running was just part of sort of my daily routine, loved running. I had like a 4-mile loop and a 4.5-mile loop, and I do one of them pretty much every single day. And then after college, had a few different jobs, bounced around different places, actually on the East Coast. Ended up then, after a few years of bouncing around different jobs, I ended up back in Chambersburg. And during that time of bouncing around, I was still running, but not a lot. There were, I always, some days literally I might go out and run 2 miles once or twice a week. And just with my lifestyle and stuff, I gained a lot of weight. I think you had sort of a similar story, Adam, after college. Yeah, I got big, and It was one day, I can tell you, it was I was back in Chambersburg, living in an apartment in Chambersburg, and I was out on a Saturday morning for like a 2 mile run, feeling big, out of shape, but I was doing it. And I ran past the Chambersburg YMCA at the exact same time runners were finishing the half marathon right in front of the YMCA. And I just sort of happened, just happened to be running by there. And I thought, man, it'd be awesome to be in that kind of shape to run a half marathon. Long story short, the 1 year later, March of 1999, I ran the Chambersburg half marathon. And I believe my time was an hour 33. And then if we fast forward 6 months to Labor Day of 1999, I'm at a family reunion on Labor Day weekend. Like I did a lot of times, I'd, travel with my running gear. It was a out of town family reunion, a little lakeside cabin, and a bunch of family there. And I had like just returned from a run, and I'm talking, a 4 or 5 mile run, and talking with a room full of people. And someone asked me when I'm going to run a marathon. And honestly, at that point, wasn't anything it was always something I knew I wanted to do someday, but I wasn't sure when. Certainly wasn't training for it. And I said, I wanted, so I was asked this question, when are you going to run a marathon? I said, I'm not sure, but what I said was I could probably do one now if I had to. And my girlfriend at the time, it was like the room went silent, loudly said, no, you couldn't. And that night, literally that night, we got back home from the family reunion. I got on my little iMac computer, got them dial up internet, and registered for the Harrisburg Marathon. 2 months later, did the Harrisburg Marathon, ran it in 3 hours and 14 minutes. And at the end of it, not only was I never running another marathon, I was never going to run again. But then a few days after that, I started thinking about Boston Marathon. And about how, back then, I guess, I'm in my late 20s, the open male 18 to 34, the qualifying time back then was 3:10. Actually, they gave you 59 seconds, 3:10:59. And, I was just a couple minutes off. So then I thought that'd be the ultimate in life, is to go run the Boston Marathon. So I trained hard, just slightly harder. I went back, my second marathon, Harrisburg 2000. I waited a whole year, went back and did the exact same marathon, ran 3:04. So qualified for Boston. And back then you could just register and you could register for that next year's Boston. I think you could pretty much do it almost up to race day. It was still a huge race, but it wasn't like it is today. And the qualifying times are much stricter. So I did that Boston. It was either 3:02 or 3:03, a slight PR. And I was on pace to break 3 hours for a lot of it. So that became the next chase, to break 3 hours. And after a few years, the thing was, I never even really changed my training. I can't even tell you how many marathons I ran, that 3:02 to 3:05. I wouldn't change my training at all, and I'd get the same result. So finally, I incorporated on my own a little bit of speed work. And Harrisburg 2004, I went back and ran 2:57. And I remember I'd just been in Hagerstown a couple years then and become friends with Mike Spindler. And he was always trying to talk me to come into his Wednesday morning. He has Wednesday morning workout crew of, adult athletes that work out on the track Wednesday. And I never committed to him. He always told me I needed to come, and I would show up once every few months. So there was no consistent speed work or training with him. So I still remember, but he knew I had this big goal of breaking 3 hours that day. So that day he was paying attention to the results. I got home from the race, and I can't remember if he called me or sent me an email, but I think it was an email congratulating me on breaking 3 hours. Like, that's so awesome. You did it, blah, 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 blah. And then it was like the very next day, I get another email from him that says, it's great you broke 3 hours, but you should be able to run 2:45. So I don't know what it was. So that was the fall of 2004. Starting January of 2005, I committed to his Wednesday morning speed work. And that just changed everything. Obviously, you're doing speed work once a week, like structured session with a coach. Mike's yelling at you, it was great. And then that just seeped over into every other part of my running. I was, if you're committing to Wednesday speed work, you're just, everything changes. I'm just going to, your mileage builds up. I just started doing longer long runs. Everything changed. And then that fall, I lowered my PR to 2:46 at Steamtown. So I went from 2:57 to 2:46. And then in Boston in 2006, I ran 2:44. And that's the greatest I ever felt in a marathon. We're in back-to-back 122s. Felt easy. After that, I thought the next goal was to break 2:40. That never happened. I ran several more marathons in the 240s, but I never broke 240. But my passion in the fall was the JFK. So I had some good JFKs where I think those days, some of those days, maybe I was in sub 240 shape, but instead I raced JFK. So yeah, that's sort of my story as a runner. I had more success. Like I guess my JFK PR 6 hours and 34 minutes. My marathon PR is still that 244 from Boston in 06, but those results are significantly better than anything I did in high school. Like I was a much better adult runner than I was as a kid. So that's my running story.
No, and I love that, and I have a couple things to say and comment about that. So your JFK times and your marathon times are almost identical to mine. However,
Yeah,
you do
I'm
have the
I'm
upper
aware of
hand.
that.
Yeah, yeah, we're both aware of that, right? So
Yeah,
your
well,
your
not by much.
your JFK PR is 6:34:36. Mine's 6:35:57.
Okay.
And your PR marathon is 2:44:44. Is that
You're
correct?
44, 45.
2:44:45, and mine is 2:44:48. So just
Wow.
off. However, Andy, I will throw out Fire on the Mountain. My Fire on the Mountain PR is 4:56:17. Yours is 4:59:31. So I got
Okay.
you
You
beat
got
at
me
Fire
there.
on the Mountain. I'm gonna take that
Yeah.
win, okay, because I have to here. But
Yeah.
you know how I loved how in Hans's YouTube video about JFK, he talked about chasing the ghost of the past. And just a couple years ago, I was always looking at your JFK best, trying to beat that, and I never could quite get down to that. But
Yeah. Well, I'm flattered. Thank you.
always looked up to you, and
It's not ever yet. Well, I appreciate that. But yeah, you still have a few more years to make a run at those times.
I hope. But hey, the comment you made about your former girlfriend when the room went silent, kind of, laughing at you a little bit and said, "No, you can't." That comment probably changed your life. Like
Yeah, it
you.
did. I mean, that maybe I always was going to do one, and maybe I would have even done one that fall. I can't say that I wouldn't have, but I was not, probably not. But just the idea that I was told I couldn't, and in her mind, running a marathon was like a superhuman feat, and I guess she didn't think I was superhuman, so she told me I couldn't do it. But that same she came to the marathon the day I did it. So it's not like she wasn't supportive. She just didn't think that was, yeah, she didn't think I could do it. And she said it in front of my whole family. So yeah, 2 months later, I proved her wrong.
Yeah, I love that, and I know you kind of have that fire inside of you that Chris and I have as well. So I know I can definitely relate to that. Let's go into the sports writing world, I guess. How did that career come about? And yeah, lead us into that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I had a bunch of different jobs after college and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was bouncing around. I was directionless. I ended up quitting a good job but because I didn't like it. Then I was at a temp job trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And one day I just decided, really had some deep thought, like it just came to, I shouldn't even say a deep thought. It just came to me. I wanted to be a sports writer. I always loved sports, loved reading newspapers, and I always felt like I was a decent writer. I just sort of made it happen. I was living in Chambersburg. I got some freelance work at the local public opinion. That's named the Chambersburg paper, and in a neighboring town, a little tiny paper called the Shippensburg News Chronicle. They would have me cover some sports for them, and I did that for a few months, and then a full-time job came open at the Record Herald in Waynesboro, Pennsylvania, and I applied for the job, got it, worked there about 2 years. And then there was a job opening at a slightly larger paper in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. I went and worked there for just 1 year. And then there was a job opening at the Herald Mail in Hagerstown, which was even bigger. And I applied for that job and got it. And I thought I would just be, here in Hagerstown, just a couple years and I'd move on. And I got really comfortable here. I liked the paper, like the people I worked with, like the stuff I was covering, and got married. First had a girlfriend, then we got married, and we bought a house here, had kids. So pretty soon I was just a Hagerstonian, and I stayed at the Herald Mail for 23 years.
Yeah, so I know this. You're at the Herald Mail for 23 years, and then you were offered a buyout, right? And then that left
Yes.
some open time here. So what moment, I guess, before that made you realize that like this story of the book, The Hagerstown versus the World, kind of needed to be written?
Well, yeah. So it sort of came together. Like I was offered this buyout, and it was a good opportunity. It was a good opportunity to leave a struggling business, a struggling company. They were going to pay me for X amount of months, but I didn't have to. I wasn't. The writing was on the wall. I felt like I can't. It wasn't the first time I was offered a buyout. This time, I kind of thought I should take it, and I was given a very short period of time. Like I was offered this and had like less than a week to decide. And I was really on the fence. And one day I was out mowing the lawn, and it came to me that I wanted to write this book as a story I wanted to tell. And sort of the idea of I'm going to write this book, that was just like, okay, I'm going to take the buyout and I'm going to use this up, take this opportunity to write this book because I couldn't have done it otherwise. I mean, it's not a long book. It's like 30,000 words. You can read it in a few hours. It moves at a fast pace, but I never would have had the ambition or any, to do it in my free time. I just had, I literally did nothing else for 3 months but work on this book. So it came together quickly.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm really inspired by folks who have the ability to do that, to preconceive of a story like that, and then find the time and put those words on paper and see it through. What a fantastic way to bring together your stories from your running history of following the sport in the area. Is there a particular chapter in the book that you think readers will really connect with?
Oh, I'm hoping they connect with all of them to be yeah. I mean, I like a lot of it. I mean, I think I'm really happy with how this came out. I wasn't sure right when I started. When it was over though, when it was done, I really liked it. Hoped others would. As far as like I mean, if I was to tell someone you can only read one chapter, it would be one of the early. I mean, some of the later chapters are great, but they don't have, if you just read them without the context of the earlier chapters, they might not stand out as much. One of the earlier chapters about Terry Baker. Terry Baker was one of the best runners in America, and he, just his the launch of his career and is really something else. And that's one of the early chapters. Here's a kid who grew up, in poverty, no running water, no electricity, he's the middle of 7 children. His parents never, their education stopped in 6th grade. It was not, he loved his family. It was a good family. They just they didn't have any money. And he came from that to becoming literally one of the best runners in America, if not the world. Is a great story. And I devote a lot of time sort of to his youth and him growing up and how he first started running. The very first race he ever ran was he ran barefoot because he didn't have shoes for running. His shoes were too worn out for running. He ran a mile run during a field day when he was in 7th grade, and it went really well. And that sort of launched it all.
Andy, here's a pretty good story about Terry Baker that you may or may not know, but 2019 Williamsport High School cross country, we won the state championship. And I say we because I was an assistant coach there, but we had Iggy Chalker, who was the individual champion, the first individual champion since Terry Baker in 1972. Is that correct?
That's actually not correct. Terry Baker
Oh, he got second.
Terry Baker won 3 state titles in the 2 mile. No, he won 2 state titles in the 2 mile, one in the 1 mile in outdoor track. There's no indoor track, but yeah, his best finish in cross country was second, which he got twice.
But the team
So
won, right?
yeah, I guess that may have been the first time since his team won back in the early 70s.
Yeah.
But the last state champion was Barry Holder in,
Okay.
I think it was 1977, another Williamsport guy whose name's in the book as well.
Yeah. So
But yeah, that when Iggy won his title, he was the first since Barry Holder in the late
okay.
70s.
So we get back to Williamsport High School after the state championship meet, and it's all the parents are there, some of the communities there. We have a fire truck waiting for us to ride around town on the fire truck, but Terry Baker is there to congratulate Iggy Chalker on his win and to talk to the boys on the team for the state championship. So I thought that was really special of him to come out and greet the boys and talk to them. So for him to
Oh
still
yeah, it's
be able,
really cool. Yeah,
yeah,
Terry Baker's running resume is, and a lot of people don't know that. I think I've heard from some people they're like they know him as like the local politician. Some people have heard he was a good runner, but what does that mean? Be everyone, being a good runner is relative. Did for some people placing top 10 at the Turkey Trot 10K means you're elite. But Terry was placing top 10 at biggest races in America,
yeah.
winning some of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you talked about in the book his race against Bill Rogers, right, at the Cherry Blossom 10 miler. Man, I wish I could have been there to see that race.
Oh man, me too. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the legendary Hagerstown races. Bill Rogers is the biggest name in running. He has his own line of clothes. At that point, he'd twice been on the cover, not just of Runner's World, Sports Illustrated. When you're on the cover of Sports Illustrated, you have to be a rock star if you're a runner and on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And by that point in his life, Bill Rogers had been on the cover twice. Yeah. And Terry Baker beat him at Cherry Blossom at the peak of Bill Rogers. And the great part of that story is Bill Rogers had just signed with Puma, and Puma offered him a $10,000. So Bill Rogers entered Cherry Blossom that year as the 4-time defending champion, the course record holder, big time favorite. He just signed with Puma. Puma's going to give him a $10,000 bonus if he wins it again. And there's no prize money. So Terry's not running for any prize money, but he heard that Bill had this bonus and he didn't want him to get it. And yeah, he did what he had to do. It was a windy day. They actually have a name, kind of like the Duel in the Sun, which was 2 weeks later, actually. But there was a name for the cherry blossom that year. I didn't actually. That year got a nickname because the winds were so bad. It was gale force winds. Like there were, waves and whitecaps on the Potomac River. But then, just like at the finish line, this literally happened. Bill Rogers signed autographs for like 80 minutes. That's how big of a star he was in running. He didn't win the race, but he was still, he was a rock star.
Yeah, that's I've run Cherry Blossom on a windy day, and when you turn the corner at Haynes Point, there's you can't describe that in words when that wind is coming at you that fast, and I'm sure it was worse on that day.
Yeah, and everyone's times, I mean, at that level, those guys were all running and, would run it in 47 and change. And that day, only a couple of them broke 50 minutes.
Yeah. Hey, so when you started looking at like this group of guys, and we'll get into some of their names here in a little bit, but how did that like running culture, that group of guys, when you started to comparing it to like today, either in Hagerstown or like maybe other groups that how do you think that was different?
Oh, well, different. I mean, drastically different. There's a good, and you're one of the leaders of it. There's a good running scene in Hagerstown, but it's nothing like it was in the 80s. I mean, what was happening here in the 80s, and the reason I wrote the book, because it was phenomenal. There were, you had to go to a town like Boulder or, Eugene, Oregon, or someplace like that to find any kind of training group that matched what was happening here in Hagerstown. I mean, countless people going to the every Olympic trials, people that were going to the major races and winning them. I make a point of saying, the standard of running excellence in Hagerstown then wasn't winning the local races or qualifying for Boston. It was reaching the Olympic trials, and quite a few of them did. And so yeah, that was real different. And even if you look at, but there were still low key races in Hagerstown, but if you go back and look at what the winning times were, I mean, because of who was here, you had to break, if you're going to win the local 10K, you had to run under 30 minutes.
Yeah, that's that I've seen some of those, record books and there's plenty that you think, hey, that's never gonna be broken. And there were no super shoes back then, no high performance nutrition. Those guys were just
No GPS, no Strava, no Instagram, no Let's Run.com, none of that.
So what do you think it was that brought such a collection of runners to the Hagerstown area? Was it just by chance, or do you think there was something that drew them in?
Well, you didn't read the book.
No.
I'm just kidding. Well, some of them were from here. I mean, that's just it. Some of them, it happened, some of them were from here. And it was just like, every now and then, the stars aligned. And it just so happened a few of them, were from here. And then because of the success they had, others moved here. And they also had this great coach, Greg Shank. And Greg Shank was a very high level coach, obviously. And they came and they wanted to be coached by him. Yeah. And he did a phenomenal job. And then, there were guys like Chris Fox. Chris Fox he ran for Athletics West, which was, I don't think and there's never been, that was the running team. I mean, if you were a star runner in the 80s, like the best of the best, you ran for Nike and you were on the Athletics West team. And if you saw an Athletics West singlet at a race, you knew that person is, one of the best runners on planet Earth. And he was a member of Athletics West. And he trained in Eugene, Oregon with like the Athletics West runners. And they had the highest, the best coaches, you would think the best coaches around. And he found his sweet spot coming back home and being coached by Greg Shank, who was a guy who worked at Mack Trucks, who sort of figured out how to coach on his own. And he got incredible results out of these guys, and they believed in him. They believed in each other. They fully believed in him. They never questioned, he was kind of, Greg Shank was sort of a, I don't want almost like a mad scientist with these workouts he'd come up with. And no one ever questioned him. They just did them and got big time results.
Yeah, I think there was definitely a lot of belief in what, Greg was giving these guys, and just the fact of like, hey, there's a group of 4 to 5 guys at any time that were meeting on Saturday for speed work and then going long on Sundays on the towpath. And like it at that point, that's what we do, right? And these guys just did it. They wanted to get better. They wanted to beat each other. They wanted to beat everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, that's sort of where the title of the book came from, Hagerstown versus the world. Yeah, they were training to literally try to be the best in the world. They were training to reach the Olympic trials, and and why do you want to go to the Olympic trials? So you can go take on the best of the world, make an Olympic team.
So Andy, I'm a little curious here. So I show up to, I don't know, a local 10K, right? And I go to the start line and I get my Saucony Endorphin Elites tied up, and I put on my CVAC singlet or my Tulo singlet, and I'm listening to the loudspeakers, and they're blasting music, and we're getting ready to go. Is that what these guys like did too? I mean, what was the race scene like in the early 80s compared to what it is now?
Well, I think I was highly competitive. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I wasn't at most of the races I'm writing about. I was not there, but I was running in the 80s, and I went, started running in high school in the 80s, did some road races. I didn't do any huge road races in the 80s, but the culture was, it was an incredible culture. And guys, it was like blue collar. Like, what amazes me is, if you look at the duel in the Sun results, the 1982 Boston Marathon. So Mike Spindler, another character in the book, Mike Spindler ran 2 hours and 28 minutes and was 370, I think 371st. I mean, that's remarkable depth in 1982. I know, you know what? I can't tell you what time 371st place is at Boston right now. I can't remember what it's been the last few years. I know there's a new resurgence in running, but I know all the years I ran Boston, 371st place was a lot slower than 228. Because I can tell you, the year I ran 244.45, I was 238.
Yeah. And let's let everybody make sure everybody knows that you ran Boston 13 times. So I
Yeah,
wanted to
13
put that
times.
in there earlier, but I forgot. So I'll give you that plug right now for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. So
Yeah.
13 times. So yeah, and none of the years I ran had the depth that those years in the 80s had. And there was no, in 82, there was no prize money. I mean, imagine that. There's no prize money. People aren't running for, you're not gonna, you're not running to get selfies at the end. You're just out there, you've total blue collar, and it meant the world.
Yeah.
Like you were like, you were judged, if you're in that world, you were judged by your PRs or your performances at the big races, or,
Yeah. So, is there one race story from the book that when you think about it now, it still gives you chills when you think about how it finished and how it all played out?
I mean, several of the chapters end with like big wins. That's sort of how it's structured, or not all of them, but a lot of them are build ups to like some of the best victories that this crew had. And a lot of them were great. I gotta tell you, the end of the book, if anything gives me chills, it's the end, just sort of the end of the book. When I think it's a short ending, but the way the book, if anything gives me chills, it's the way the book ends.
Andy, I'm going to interrupt you there. Are you talking about what's in italics on the very last page?
Yes. Yeah, just sort
I
of
was
like,
gonna bring that up later, honestly, because I'm not lying. When I read that, if it weren't 10 p.m. at night, I would have put my shoes on and drove to the towpath and just ran, probably until my legs fell off again. Like that part about the towpath keeps the miles, and I won't say the rest, but like that just meant a lot to me. I loved that little ending of the book.
yeah, I gave a lot of thought. What's it, like 4 or 5 sentences? I gave a
Yeah.
lot of thought to that. That's sort of like, you know, if there's a poet in me, that's it. That's sort of like, that was me trying to be Bob Dylan.
Well, I will say that those 4 to 5 sentences spoke a lot to me, and I have that written down to make sure I brought that up here at the end, so I
Yeah.
appreciate the time that you put into
Yeah,
those
so
words.
when I got those verses, I guess, when I got them together, I was like, that's it. And then if anything gives me chills, it's when I read that again, and the sort of the book ends. And I got to tell you, the first time I wrote that, I had tears in my eyes. Like when I wrote it, I got it all down, then I reread it again. It's like, that's it. That's my ending.
Was there a story or an event that you heard about when you were doing your research that maybe didn't make the book that you had to cut out? Because I know you were trying to keep it 30,000 words, so was there
Yeah, well,
something that you
I didn't, I thought it would be longer. It was just like when it was done, I knew it was done. There were some other stories I thought I might get into. I mean, these guys ran a ton of races. I didn't dive into I sort of just touched on, like, I went in depth with the bigger ones, the ones that more added to the story. But what was important to me, I wanted it to move at a fast pace. I didn't ever want there to be any kind of lull. And I hope I was successful. People are telling me they can't put it down. That's the best compliment I can have. If it were twice as long, you would have to put it down. Yeah, one thing I thought I would write about, Terry Baker had an arch rival, a guy named John Daub, who lived in Waynesboro, who was also, and he's in the book, and I mentioned him a couple times, and sort of I alluded that they were rivals, and Terry hated losing to him. But John Daub was an incredible runner too, and they went back and forth at the races, and they didn't like each other one bit. And they had a few moments where they had to be separated at races. Fists were drawn. And it was. I thought that would really add some color to it, but at the end, I just decided, yeah, it's not necessary. I don't. I left that out. I could have added some. That would have been entertaining to some, but I just decided to leave it out.
that sounds like Chris and I at a lot of our local 5Ks. We're just
Yeah.
battling.
But I love that running, that's great for the sport when you have these two guys in the area. They're both freaking awesome and they hate each other. And, and I don't even know exactly why they didn't like each other, but they didn't.
I would have enjoyed that story in the book, but maybe it didn't fit into where you needed
Well,
to fit
I was
into.
like,
But
it was like, there was a lot of information. It was just like, I decided I don't know. I just moved on without it.
yeah,
Yeah, but you asked me if there's something I wish I had written. I don't know if I wish I did, but I could have added some more color to the book by talking about those guys. There was one race, I think they call it the metric marathon, down, was it Columbia, Maryland, maybe? It was 26.2 kilometers. So it was a metric marathon. I think it was in Columbia. So Spindler, not to give the whole, a lot of people know, Mike Spindler wins the JFK and 1982 on a Saturday in November. The very next day is the metric marathon. So Mike's there just hanging out and watching. And Terry Baker and John Daub had this big duel that day. And Daub, I guess, went out hard and ended up dropping out. And Terry was being interviewed after the race and told the Baltimore Sun reporter, like, something like, that's typical John Daub. And what he meant, his quote sort of got misconstrued, even though what Terry meant was that was typical of him to like take the race out hard, not like to fall apart and drop out. But the way it was written was you could take it that, he meant the other way. And then a few days later, those guys are at the Berwick Run for the Diamonds on Thanksgiving morning, and yeah, they're literally running. That's a huge race, local, regional race. They're running right at the front of the pack, and they almost started swinging away at each other during the middle of that race. And then at the award ceremony later that day, they had to be separated. So then none of that's in the book. That would have made it, that would have, so like I said, added some color to it. But yeah, that's not in there.
Well, now that you've finished the book and it's been out for a little bit, is there like any particular message or idea that you hope the average reader will take away from the book?
Yeah, I want the message. I mean, the message more than anything is like, that's, for one thing, the reason I wrote this, I wanted to give some permanency to this sort of incredible batch of stories, this incredible era, this, sort of tie it all together. Like, this is what happened. These were the characters. This is what they did. This is what made running in the Hagerstown area so special in the 1980s. And it's sort of how it started it started in the 70s with Terry Baker. Those guys, got their starts in the 70s. The boom was in the 80s, and then it carried over well into the 90s. And the last races I talk about are the 2000 Olympic trials. And then I moved to Hagerstown in 2002, and all that's left, that era is gone. I'm here in 2002, and all that's left are the stories. Pretty much every guy I'm writing about in the books retired from competitive running by then. Pretty much all of them. And yeah, all that was left all that was left are the stories. And but right away, I mean, I grew up a running fan, reading running magazines. I mean, I knew running just like I knew baseball when I was a kid. So I start the job at the Herald Mail in the summer of '02. And the fall of '02, I go out and cover a cross country meet. And I can't remember exactly which meet it was. It was an invitational. And I think it was the first one I'd covered, and a meeting, sort of getting familiar with the local runners, coaches, and teams. And I'm just, Washington County is not a big county. There's only 7 public schools. Only 6 of them at the time had cross country teams. But it's like, wow, look who the head coach of North Hagerstown is. It's Christy Johnston. Christy Johnston, just a couple years earlier, finished second in the Olympic trials marathon. A few years before that, she won the Chicago Marathon. So here's the champion of a world major marathon as the head coach of North Hagerstown High School. Her assistant coach is Jeff Scuffins. Well, Jeff Scuffins is the course record holder at Marine Corps. Then you look at South Hagerstown. Their head coach is Brian Ferrari, a 3-time NCAA Division II national champion who ran in the Olympic trials in the marathon. Who's coaching Clear Spring? Terry Baker. Terry Baker, also an Olympic trials runner, a guy who was top 10 at Boston, beat Bill Rogers at Cherry Blossom, won other big time races. And then who am I standing next to talking at that meet? It's Mike Spindler. Mike Spindler at the time, 2-time JFK champion at the time. I believe his winning time from '82 was at that point still like the number 2 overall time in the course history. And there's his wife. His wife ran the Olympic trials in '88. So you're just at this little cross country meet. It's like, this is unbelievable that there's this level of like former stud runners in this little tiny area, men and women. And, I knew right then that this, it was just extraordinary. And, 20 plus years later, I finally, sort of told the story of what happened, how it happened. And
No, you're absolutely right, Andy. In Hagerstown, we have a bunch of smaller races, I guess you could call them, but some of them are named after some of these guys in the book, and it's good to like go there and kind of know, like, hey, we're at the Greg Schenk 5K. It's on July 4th in Williamsport, and when you always see those races named after somebody, you say the name, and that's kind of the end of it, and like hopefully this book brings to light like who Greg Schenk was, or I'm promoting here again, but we just added the Buzz Sawyer Marathon in Hancock, right? So we added that. I know Jeff Scuffins had a race named after him for a while. Mike and Maria are at JFK every single year, obviously. So these people are still around Hagerstown. Even if they've passed, their names are still around all the time.
Adam, you're so right. Like as you know, but Andy, you wouldn't know. I moved to Shepherdstown just 3.5 years ago, and so I'm getting introduced to all these races that have these names. And for me, as an outsider, right, I'm relying on Adam to tell me who these people are. When we're running on the canal, who's this Gary Brown guy? And what's the deal with Buzz Sawyer? And I really appreciate hearing those stories from him, but I'm really looking forward to diving deeper into that and getting into the book and learning more about their history.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I hope, yeah, I think you'll
Yeah.
enjoy it. It's
So, hey, Andy, real quick, because our podcast is Tales on the Towpath. So these guys put down thousands of miles on the towpath, training Saturday, Sunday, and I know you have as well. Do you have a favorite section of the towpath?
I can tell you my favorite, you know, back in my prime, my favorite workout was to go, go to the towpath, go left, and go to the Rod and Gun Club, which was about 5.5 miles, and then you can do a hill loop there, which is the loop's roughly about a mile and a half. I would go there and go there and do hill repeats. 3 weeks before I ran my JFK PR, I was running with Tim Fissler, and he and I did 10 of those. So we ran 26-mile run with 10 hill loops in the middle. So that was my favorite. I think most folks enjoy, I think, like going west more. For whatever reason, I always was drawn to, I mean, I love both sides, but when I would go to Cushwa Basin, I just sort of naturally would want to make a left, even though it's a little bit of an uglier start for the first, it takes a little bit to get into the woods.
I always tell Katie if something ever happened and like I won the lottery or I came into some money, that if you when you go to Cushwa Basin, if you go to the right and you go out about 3.5 miles, I think there's like a old white like house kind of in the woods there.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, we used to call that the Blair Witch House.
yeah, but if I came into some money, I would find out how to buy that house, and that would be where I lived when I wanted to train, because that
Yeah,
that would be a perfect spot. So
yeah,
that's
yeah.
the only reason.
That's a sweet section of the towpath there too. From there for like the next mile after that's a great little spot.
Yeah, I love that Williamsport area of the towpath as well. I know when I was teaching there, I used to go down there and run down, that area all the time. All right. Hey, Andy, if you could go back, as I'm reading this book about Jeff Scuffins in Marine Corps, I'm reading about Terry Baker in Cherry Blossom at Boston with Spindler. There's some great stories about the Olympics or the Olympic trials. If you could go back and be in one of the races, be a participant, I know it might be hard to choose here, but which race would you choose to be in?
Well, because here's the thing. That's hard to answer because if I was in the race, I'd rather almost be a spectator because I wouldn't have been able to see, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I'm not going
right.
to be anywhere near, I'm not going to be anywhere near the action that was taking place at the front at those races. But as far as that's a good one. I think those I would love to have seen the finishes of the Cherry Blossom in both 82 and 90, the 2 years the Hagerstown guys won. That, I mean, I would have, so I can say that I would rather be at the finish line watching that. There are a lot of those races would have been fun to run in, obviously, but I would love to have been a spectator at the finish line for both of those Cherry Blossoms.
Yeah, that's awesome. I didn't even think about, I guess maybe I could have said like, hey, if I could give you the legs to keep up with the guys in first, would that make any difference?
Yeah. Yeah. The Marine Corps in 87, boy, that was something else too.
Yeah.
The way that all happened, I mean, that's one of the best stories that's the best probably race story of the book. And that's sort of why, I picked one thing to sort of intertwine, that particular Marine Corps race, the book opens with it and then it comes back to it and then comes back to it later to finish it out. So yeah, that was it. That was a really special race.
I'll tell you my favorite story from the book, and it's a story that I've heard multiple times from the great Mike Spindler, and that's the Terry Baker story about the Boston Marathon and how Mike finished and didn't see Terry anywhere, so he goes back to the room and he sees Terry in the room, and then I'm gonna stop here so our listeners will go get the book and figure out how
Yeah.
Terry
Oh
Baker
yeah,
did.
that's one of the that's a classic story.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a
So
and then just another story in the book that I love, is the one where Spindler's in college and still, Spindler, he's so obsessed with running. He's so into it that he's out drinking at a bar and tells his friends that he's what they're talking about what they're going to do after college and what's his plan. I'm going to win the Boston Marathon. So he's drinking beer saying that's his career plan. I'm going to, if the day turns really hot, I'm going to learn how to run in the heat so I can win the Boston Marathon like his hero Jack Fultz did in 1976. One of his friends tells him, you don't have a snowball's chance in hell of doing that. And a fist fight broke. Can you imagine that, getting into a fist fight over saying you're going to win the Boston Marathon and someone telling you you're not going to do it? That's great. That's classic. I mean, that's a classic story.
yeah, I love it. Andy, is there anything else before I tell my story about kind of how you and I have met before? And then, so anything else from the book that you would like to share before we head into a little bit of a different direction?
No, I mean, I just that it was, I had a lot of fun writing it. I had a whole lot of fun writing it, and it just makes it. I can't even tell you how happy it makes me to hear people saying they enjoyed reading it. That's really gratifying.
Yeah, I think if you're from Hagerstown or the surrounding area, it's definitely a must read. Or if you love running or like running or hate running, it's still a must read. I really did.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I've had people who aren't into running, who don't know any of these people, aren't from Hagerstown, who a few people that just read it because they know me, and because I wrote it, they decided they were interested in what it was, and when these people tell me they couldn't put it down, that's the ultimate. That's the ultimate goal, to tell a story that people want to hear, no matter what it's about.
Before we wrap this up, I do want to go back to COVID, the 2020 year. And I know I ran a 12-hour race on the towpath. It was a 5 mile kind of virtual thing. I think I've talked about it on here before. And I ended up doing 70 miles that day. And I posted it in our Facebook group about the 100-day running club that I just did this internet, basically COVID virtual run. And I had finished 70 miles in the 12 hours. And I think a day or two later, you reached out to me and you're like, hey, do you want to be interviewed for an article in the Herald Mail? And I was like, man, there are really no sports going on right now. And
I remember. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's true. I had to find sports story. I was looking for sports stories wherever I could find them, and that was a good story. I mean, that would be a good story even if there were lots of sports going on. I mean, that
right.
was
Well,
really.
I appreciate that, and the only reason I bring it up is just to to let you know that your writing of that really did change my trajectory in running and my life. I know that you know that like Spindler read the article and then contacted you and then kind of was like, "Hey, who's this Adam Lowe dude? Let's get him on the
Yeah.
JFK team." And that kind of really did propel me forward. So I would have never have thought that that would have been a reason. I was just a dumb guy who didn't have to go to work, who wanted to spend 12 hours on the towpath. So I just wanted to say thank you for writing that article and doing such a great job with that.
Well, man, thank you for giving me something good to write about.
You
I
you
appreciate
also
it.
wrote another article about me when I was in the hospital from my
Yeah, well,
AT
yeah,
attempt. But
yeah.
yeah, that was a different ending. I remember calling you from the hospital and telling you that we had to delay the interview because I was not able to meet you at Cushwa like we had planned.
Yeah, well, you went next level with this extreme stuff. I know, because in the summer of 2010, I did a 100-mile race, the Burning River 100, summer of 2010. And back then, no one around here was doing stuff. And that seemed, that was seemed, real extreme around here.
Yeah.
Now lots of people are doing that.
Yeah, it seems like, yeah, a lot of people that we know are doing 50s or hundreds or even longer now. So it's pretty cool how the sport has evolved. Andy, where can we find the book right now?
So the book's on Amazon. You can, go to Amazon and search for Hagerstown versus the World, Hagerstown running books. It'll pop right up. You can also buy it at the Last Chapter bookstore in downtown Hagerstown. I think it's called Last Chapter Cafe and Bookshop. It's a new place downtown, really nice. It's really an awesome little locally owned bookstore and a great cafe. I've eaten there, good food. And it's also at ELM Shoes in Greencastle during their,
Yeah.
I guess it's ELM Actives. They're the section for devoted to running. So you can buy it there as well.
I can tell you had a lot of fun writing this book, and I know that you have. I've heard you say that before. Is there another book in the works, or is it too early to say?
It's too early to say. I would love to write another book. It's just a matter of sitting down and I've got to I have to really nail down what I want to write about. Like with this, I was dialed in. I knew exactly who I wanted to talk to. I mean, I had a lot of background before I started this. The way the book came out is not exactly how I envisioned when I started, but pretty close. So I had the rough outline in my head of how I wanted to do this almost from the get-go. So I hope there's another book.
Yeah.
I hope there's one.
Selfishly, I do too, because I really enjoyed reading this one. So I hope you figure out a topic for a second book so I can enjoy that one as well.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that.
Yeah. So I thought I was gonna end with part from that last page that we talked about earlier, but I'm gonna let people go on there and read it for themselves. But I will say this about that part. If they've ever run on the towpath, that last page will mean something to them for sure.
Yeah, and I think it'll also, even if you've never run on the towpath, I think you can sort of understand what it means too. But yeah, if you run on the towpath, especially if you ran with those guys, which
Right.
I didn't. I didn't run with those guys, but I sort of, that was a special period. Yeah, they were brothers, a family.
Yeah, not many people would have been able to run with those guys. I might have been able to meet them at the house at the start line, and then I might have been able to meet them at the finish line a couple hours later. But yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, Chris, any final thoughts for Andy before we wrap this up?
No, Andy, I just really appreciate you coming on and sharing some stories with us. And as I said earlier, I'm really looking forward to getting a copy of the book. Adam has given it such high praise, and I'm excited to get an opportunity to get into some of those chapters.
Oh, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on here. I like an opportunity to talk about it, so this is great.
Chris, I would loan you my copy, but it is actually signed by the Andy Mason. So I'm a little worried about letting you borrow it. I might not get it back.
Well, I will be at the Hagerstown Race Festival this coming weekend, so hopefully I'll have a copy and maybe I can get one signed as well.
Yeah, you can.
Andy, you're gonna have books for sale there as well?
Yes, yeah, I'm gonna have
okay.
books for sale there. Yeah.
All right, yep, we'll put that in a post for you in the next couple of days so people know that they can buy books and see you out
I
there.
appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, yep. Thanks a lot for coming on, Andy. This was a ton of fun.
Yeah, thank you.
That's all for today's episode of Tales on the Towpath. Thanks for joining us on another run down memory lane and along the C&O. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to follow, share it with a friend, and leave us a review. Until next time, keep your pace steady and your stories flowing.